One of the most unexplored backstories in all of Disney has got to be Cinderella's mother. The woman clearly had an impact on her daughter's life, and we know from various retellings of the story that she was the main reason that Cinderella put up with her stepfamily's nonsense for so long. But still, Disney has remained oddly quiet about who exactly Cinderella's mom was and, more importantly, what happened to her. Thankfully, there are die-hard fans and other versions of Cinderella's tale to pick up where the House of Mouse has kept mum. Stick around because you're not going to want to miss the untold truth of what really happened to Cinderella's mom. In every version of the Cinderella story, the titular character is forced into being a mistreated servant to her stepmother and stepsisters. But if her biological mother had still been present, none of that would have come to pass. What a perfect world that would have been for Cinderella. According to every version of the story, though, tragically for Cinderella, her mother passed away when she was young and her father ended up remarrying a woman who wasn't pleased to have Cinderella as a daughter. Now, despite her dying in every version of the story, not much has ever really been said or explained about who Cinderella's mother was. For years, fans have wondered what happened to Cinderella's mother and why did she have to die? Believe it or not, there might have been someone else pulling the strings of Cinderella's story all along, and in doing so, they may have directly caused her mother's death. The Odd Sisters were a trio of witches that were first introduced by Serena Valentino in her series of novels based on Disney villains. Since their introduction into the universe, the Odd Sisters have become some of the most impressive villains in all of Disney. As a fan, it's been really interesting to hear how they've essentially been creating all of the villains that are known from the many animated classics. In Valentino's novel, Cold Hearted, the story follows Lady Tremaine and her journey from leading a happy life in London to ultimately becoming an evil stepmother in the many kingdoms, none of which would have been possible without the Odd Sisters. Compared to other books in the series, the Odd Sisters' presence in Cold Hearted was kept rather brief, but it certainly showed that their influence on the world still existed. This means that it's entirely possible that they played a major role in the death of Cinderella's mother. As mentioned before, her mom's death was always shrouded in mystery, with the majority of what anyone knows being limited to the fact that she died from an unknown illness. This was the case in Cold Hearted, at least as far as the book disclosed. However, after reading through the novel, it wouldn't be surprising to find out that the Odd Sisters did something to cause Cinderella's mother to suddenly become ill. They certainly had the magical powers to do it, and it would also explain the heartache that Cinderella's father felt after her mother's death. In many of the other versions of Cinderella's story, it's noted that her father quickly moved on and remarried, which I'll discuss in a minute. But in Cold Hearted, Valentino notes that he was still obsessed over his late wife. While that could be perfectly normal behavior for a husband who just lost the love of his life, it could also indicate how sudden the death of Cinderella's mother was, as if she had contracted the illness out of nowhere and her death was entirely unexpected. And again, that's entirely possible. But with Disney, you never know what other forces are at play. So it wouldn't be surprising to find out that Cinderella's mother dying was no accident, and it was orchestrated by an outside force like the Odd Sisters. Cold Hearted acted as a way to give Lady Tremaine more backstory, but it would have been nice to get a little more information about Cinderella's mother as well. That being said, wouldn't you think that the original story of Cinderella would have a better description of how Cinderella's own mom died? The short answer is not really. In fact, one of the more detailed versions of her mother's death came in the Brothers Grimm retelling. You see, the first European version of Cinderella that was published came out in 1634 and was written by Giambattista Basile and didn't cover the titular character's mother too much. However, about 180 years later, when the Brothers Grimm published their story, Aschenputtel, they added a bit more to the story. Granted, they also added their typical Grimm's fairy tales twist to it, but that's to be expected. Now, the name Aschenputtel was their name for Cinderella, with the word Asche meaning ashes and the word Puttel being the Hessian way of saying dirty girl. So in their story, she was the ashy dirty girl. Now, as you know, many of Disney's classic fairy tales were derived from stories told by the Brothers Grimm, and when it came to Cinderella, they actually gave us more information about her mother than Disney chose to disclose. In their retelling of the story, Cinderella and her father discovered that her mother had fallen ill, much like the Disney version. However, the Brothers Grimm also explained that on her deathbed, Cinderella's mother called for her and shared some important final words with her daughter. In those words, she told Cinderella to continue being the kind-hearted girl that she was, and that even in death, she would always be looking after her. These were the last words that she spoke to her daughter, and though her time in the story was brief, it's clear to see what she truly valued. Cinderella's mother was clearly a kind soul in the Brothers Grimm story, and she believed that kindness led to a happy life, which was all she ever wanted for her daughter. Unfortunately, in the story, Cinderella's father had other plans. The Brothers Grimm explained that her father only mourned for her mother through the first winter after her death, and then he quickly moved on with his life. He met and remarried the woman who would become known as Lady Tremaine and Cinderella's stepmother without concerning himself with his daughter's opinion on the matter. And then he allowed Lady Tremaine to treat Cinderella like trash. That's right, according to their version of the story, her father was alive the entire time and just sat idly by as Cinderella was treated like a lowly servant. That wouldn't have happened if her mom mom was around, though, since she was clearly the one who cared for their daughter and the kind of person she would become. And that's the most that was known about Cinderella's mother for quite some time, with her own story constantly being overshadowed. But what about more modern versions of the story? Wouldn't you think that the more modern writers would understand the importance of Cinderella's mother's influence to the story? Well, as time has passed, there have been more additions to Disney's Cinderella that have managed to shed a little light on Cinderella's mother, including an animated novel named Cinderella's Royal Wedding, which went into more detail about what her mother left behind. In the animated story, which was made canon by Disney, Cinderella's mother was depicted as having dark brown hair, unlike her daughter, who had her signature blonde style. And even though she wasn't really shown in the story much more than just a few glimpses, fans can tell just how much she loved her daughter, and her daughter loved her based on what she left behind. You see, in Cinderella's Royal Wedding, they reiterated the idea that the dress that Cinderella almost wore to the prince's ball was actually her mother's dress, and it would seem like that dress was the only thing that Cinderella possessed that she felt connected her to her mother. So when you think about it, the fact that Drizella and Anastasia ripped the dress to shreds is even more disturbing. Not only were they potentially destroying Cinderella's only clothes that she could have worn to the ball, but they also tore apart the one thing that reminded her of her late mother. But did you know that in 2015 we got to learn even more about Cinderella's mother, which made her death seem even more tragic? The live-action version of Cinderella, which was released in 2015, gave fans their first look at the titular character's mother in the flesh and added even more depth to her brief backstory. In the movie, they showed that Ella's mother loved her family more than anything in the world, and this especially applied to her daughter. She was depicted as a blonde in this version of the story, and she showed the same sort of mannerisms that were clearly passed on to Ella. In fact, in the movie, that was where their connection was the deepest. Cinderella's mother could see that they both shared the same open-mindedness and that her daughter was a kind soul just like she was. That's why she spent all of her time teaching those values to her daughter, and it also explains why Cinderella is so calm and kind throughout her story, despite her having every right to be angry and mean, especially toward her stepmother and stepsisters. They were so horrible to her that she had every right to react with rudeness to them. But Cinderella remained calm and did what she could to keep everyone happy. And I can't help but think that this was because she believed that's what her mother would do. In the live-action version of the story, fans also got a front row seat to her mother's final moments as she passed away from an unknown illness. As Ella's mother was on her deathbed and her final moments passed in the movie, she made Cinderella promise her that she would always be kind and courageous. From her mother's perspective, those qualities would help Cinderella get through any hardship. And, as you know, in the end, she was right. In every version of the story, Cinderella kept her head high and carried herself with courage and compassion. And because of that, she found her true love and her happily ever after. Of course, her mother wasn't around to see it, which is the saddest thing of all. Now, there's still no definite answer as to what exactly happened to her or caused the illness that killed Cinderella's mom. But I'm curious what you think. What really happened to her mom? Was she murdered by perhaps the odd sisters behind the scenes? Or was she just dealt a bad hand in life? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below.